One central part of performance monitoring is mobile vitals. We believe that there are 4 metrics every mobile team and every mobile developer should keep an eye on to better understand how their app is performing. And those 4 metrics are cold start, warm start, slow, and frozen frames. So let's start with app start. When a user taps on your app icon, it should start fast. On iOS, Apple recommends your app take at most 400 milliseconds to render the first frame. On Android, the Google Play console warns you when a cold start takes longer than 5 seconds or a warm start takes longer than 2 seconds. Okay, hey, now what is the difference now between a cold and a warm start? A cold start is when the user launches your application for the first time. This is usually directly after they download the application from the App Store or the Google Play Store, or it can also be after the user reboots his phone or after an app update. This is the most trickiest start for the operating system because the app starts for the first time and it didn't have yet the chance to optimize your app start. For Apple developers, you might be usually used to the term app launch, but as we support many different platforms and on most of the platforms, app start is the term we just go here with app start. And now to the warm start. A warm start is when the app launched at least once and it might be still partially in memory. And the operating systems can do some optimizations to speed it up. The exact definitions differ slightly per platform, and you can check our docs to see those differences. But now, how does that look like in Sentry? What do we do with these metrics? We can take here a look at an example transaction. And if you never took a look at that screen, we will go into detail more on that later. But what we see here on the right is that for the app start, we just put one metric that you can see here. The app start took around 70 milliseconds, which is actually pretty good. And on iOS, we also put here spans, which we again will come to later, for different phases of the app start, how long it took. And here again is important to mention that the whole loading of the first screen took around 230 milliseconds, but the app start was way faster because the app store is all about drawing the first frame. That's the important thing. Okay, that was app start, warm and cold. Next is slow and frozen frames. Why do we measure that? Unresponsive UI, animation hitches, or just jankiness really annoy users and can degrade the user experience. And these are 2 measurements that we think make sense to track to know if your users are having this unwanted user experience. A phone or a tablet typically renders with 60 frames per second. This means every frame has around 16.6 milliseconds to be drawn. If a frame is slower than that, it's a slow frame. And if a frame hangs for over than 700 milliseconds, which is pretty long and really noticeable for the user, it's a frozen frame. Let's again take a look at an example here. This is a transaction, and for every transaction, UI transaction that our SDKs capture, we put 3 metrics on the side here. It's frozen, slow, and total frames. This gives you a good indication if this view had some trouble while rendering. For the React Native developers, it can be that you don't have any slow and frozen frames, and your app is still not running smoothly, because there's another layer on top, which is the JavaScript event loop. And if the JavaScript event loop doesn't run for 100 milliseconds, we mark it as a JavaScript event loop stall. How does it look like in the UI? We just don't track the stalls. We also track the longest stall time and the total stall time. And this transaction is really bad because it took around 5 seconds and I was spending around 1.5 seconds in a stall state where nothing was happening. If I would have such a transaction in my app, I should really do something about it. Okay, now we have all those vitals, those metrics. And what do we do with them? We give you nice dashboards. We're also going to take a look at this later at the demo. This dashboard gives you a nice overview about all the things, all the transactions that are captured in your app and you see the change of the cold start, warm start, the amount of slow and frozen frames. And this gives you a quick glance on how your application is doing.